tuning in to the online broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans. Producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows, interviewing celebrities and showrunners, and bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Yeah, what's up, AFTERBUZZ fans? We are here with another episode of Limitless After Show. This is episode 16, Sans, Agent of Morra. Obviously, we have Enter Sandman as the intro music to get a little festive, huh, Frank?
It's the perfect song to come into the episode. What a great show this was.
I know.
I really enjoyed this episode. We got to learn all about Mr. Sans, and all of the layers got peeled back on the onion. It was exciting.
Exactly. Before we dive right in, I just want to remind all of our viewers to rate us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever you guys are getting this episode. It definitely keeps the lights on here, and it keeps the content free for everybody. And free is always good.
That's right.
But yeah, if you like the show, please comment on wherever you can. YouTube, Twitter. Use the hashtag ABTVLimitless. I'm your host, JB. You guys can find me at HeyJohnBlake.
And I'm Frank Maiorana. You guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Let'sGoFrankM.
Yes, unfortunately, Amanda is not here this week, but she will be back next time we are. I believe we're in 2 weeks returning.
Yes. No episode next week.
Sadly.
Well, you know what? It's funny. Every time we have a break between shows, the episode right before the break ends up being really good.
Right.
I remember the episode when it was primarily Bradley Cooper involved with Jake McDorman. Their episode, there was a break after that one. So these episodes tend to be really, really good. And so I'm happy, you know, it's not the best that we don't get an episode next week, but this episode was worth it. And definitely
100%.
Carry us over until 2 weeks from now.
Great point. It was a good episode to go out on. I mean, I think I'm probably watch it again next week.
Yeah.
I love when they focus on the main characters. You know, we've seen Sans a lot of times. He's always been shrouded in mystery. Yeah. But we got a lot of background information about him. I mean, this is sort of like a bio episode on who Sans was. They did it in a very different sort of Quentin Tarantino style that we were talking about off camera, which I thought was good. I mean, it really worked not only because there were so many stages of Sans, if you will, that we needed to kind of go through, but there was also different elements and storytelling tools that they used this episode that they haven't really done before. The whole comic book element.
The comic book element was interesting. I think to further your point globally about this episode was that they structured the FBI storyline to interlap with the Sans background story. They both converged in the same place at the end of the episode. So in a way, the case of the week element of this show fed into the serialized element when you have Mr. Sans and learning about his past and his son and so many, you know, layers about his past all intersected at the same point at the end of the episode. Right. I thought that was really interesting and something we hadn't really seen so far in this show. The episodes tended to be a case of the week with little sprinkled bits of Morra news or entirely Eddie Morra stuff. This episode this week, the case had something to do with what was going on with Sans and with Finch as they're going around, trying to solve this case, which was rewarding to me as a viewer.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, it was so much more satisfying at the end when, things were happening. I mean, even to reference the very end, how Rebecca had figured it out and just arrived sort of in a Romeo and Juliet way, like right after they had left. It was really so much more satisfying. There's so much build up. Initially we weren't really sure what was going on. They were dealing with the different people and then we started piecing it together, figuring out that they are kind of all connected. Sands is involved. He's the father of this kid.
Yes.
So it really built up in an incredible way. And I really hope that they do more of that, because a lot of times when they do cases of the week, and they do have a lot of characters that we're following. We want to share the screen time, but at the same time, I want it to all be a big picture thing.
Yeah.
Not every episode can be. You can't bring Bradley Cooper into it all the time. He's an Academy Award nominated actor. So I really love how they webbed everything together.
Yeah.
More so than previous episodes where, sometimes it's a team thing where Rebecca and Boyle go off in one direction, Brian's handling things on his side, and they never really meet up.
Right, exactly.
This episode, we really got that back and forth. It was well paced. I really liked it.
Yeah, and even though Edward Morra doesn't show up in every episode live, his image shows up in the comic book scenes that we saw this week. He's constantly being referenced throughout the episode with Morra and Sands saying what's Morra's intentions. Brian is obviously an agent of Morra himself.
Right.
So Eddie Morra hangs over the whole series, and so you don't necessarily need Bradley Cooper in every episode because his presence as a character is so large as well. We learned some very, very big news about him this week in how Sands came to work for him and how they basically orchestrated getting rid of the NZT users and dealers and ultimately Rebecca's dad, eliminating them completely off the street, which was really exciting because we've only heard about Rebecca's dad a couple times since the season premiere, the series premiere, and now we got some real clarity on that storyline that Mr. Sands ultimately was the one who killed Rebecca's dad. That was a shocker.
Yeah, that was, spoiler alert, but hopefully if you are listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, you've seen the episode.
I would have to believe that they are.
But yeah, that was such a surprise. So good though. I can't wait for that to really play out because last episode we finally got the Sands Rebecca meeting. There's a small confrontation there when he kind of tried to recruit her. Now that we know that Brian knows that he killed her dad, how is that going to play out? Brian is so good-hearted that I don't know if that's a secret that he'd be able to keep from Rebecca.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Mr. Sands was watching on the monitor when Brian was giving Rebecca his birthday present to her. So it was
right. By the way, shout out to Rebecca. Happy birthday. It was my birthday on Sunday, so February birthdays, you're clearly a Pisces, so you're awesome.
You should get her to come on the show.
Yeah, exactly. We
share a connection. You guys are tight. So, yeah, I like the reason why she didn't like her birthdays. It was seemed petty at first when Boyle bought her a cupcake at the top of the episode and she kind of threw it in the trash. It's like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, just cupcake down. Come on.
Someone's being nice to you. Maybe you have your problems with your dad, but just because someone's giving you a cupcake doesn't mean you have to throw it in the trash right away.
Yeah, I really like how they closed all of the loops, really. Even something as small as being like a birthday Scrooge and just dropping the cupcake. They explained why. They really explained everything. Rebecca was up all night and that came back and we had her show up at the crime scene. We know that she was very close to solving it herself. Everything they set up, they concluded in this episode, which I think really contributed to how satisfying it was at the end.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I agree that this was a satisfying episode, and it starts right at the top with action. You got Mr. Sands showing up to Brian's apartment looking for help. And as soon as that happened and Brian says, why don't you call Eddie Morra? And he says no, that's when the light bulb went off for me to say, okay, Sans is on his own. He's doing something outside of what's approved by Eddie Morra. And this is going to be a really interesting episode.
Right.
Because it's not something that was already approved and came down the pike. It was something that he was doing on his own. And when Sans reaches out to Brian to help him in his mission, he really gives Brian an upper hand. And which Brian realizes to his credit and forces Sans to give him more information about his past associations, where he comes from, and ultimately learns that he has a son, that he had a love interest, which was forbidden by the organization that Sans was a part of.
The forbidden love.
So, exactly. So I think Brian got a lot of ammunition tonight and information that may come back later when I feel a conflict is building in this show, where you're going to have a big confrontation between what Brian wants and what Sans/Morra wants. And it may be over Rebecca, but I'll save that for predictions until later.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love how three-dimensional they made Sans' character. I mean, before we were like, oh, is he kind of dumb because Morra kind of keeps him at arm's length? Yeah. He just likes whiskey. He's got like an English accent. Is that it? But, not only did they give him a massive sort of agenda in this episode, they really made him so multi-layered. Like, obviously we've talked about him being a father several times, but even his origin story is interesting. Being involved in sort of like a riot and that kind of culture growing up.
Yes.
I can only assume that he's the one that threw the brick that killed the cop, and kind of getting in and even a small detail that he mentioned, kind of the blackmail into the MI6. Mm-hmm. They were going to blame that cop's death on his father. Yeah. So obviously he's a family-oriented guy, like a lot of the other characters.
Like Brian.
Yeah, exactly. Like Brian, like Rebecca. I think that there is a common ground that these characters can draw, even though that they are so different. Like, Sans is as different from Brian as Brian is from Rebecca. Like, they're all so unique. It's really interesting that they have similar values in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways not. When you have Sans walking around killing his former team members with
True.
Brian there, they're sitting in a bar or a cafe. I can't remember exactly what it was, but as he poisoned one of his former team members, that was tough to watch. Like, he was just sitting there waiting and watching somebody die. It was really brutal.
With no reaction.
With no reaction whatsoever. Brian luckily writes out the antidote and places it on the tabletop, so hopefully that team member never died. And then we saw gunshots coming from an apartment during the episode, and Sans admits to killing one of his other team members.
Right.
So in one way, he's a very brutal character and unlike Brian, but when you find out that his reason for fighting and taking all this action is his family and his son, trying to free his son, it becomes a bit more understandable, I would say.
Very much so. I mean, I think he was very desensitized to all of his training in MI6 to be able to kind of be that emotionless in the moment. But you really get the motivation. Like, finding your son is probably the highest thing you could possibly do. Like, I don't have kids myself, but I can only imagine, being a parent like that, unconditional love. Like, that's the purest form of that.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, he's definitely not the only parent that would do anything for their child, especially with that kind of special forces training. I mean, he was essentially a part of like SEAL Team 6. Like, he was Delta Force all the way, but just in the UK, which is awesome. I mean, I love how they kind of made them all comic book sort of superheroes, and then they use the classic Tarantino ways of chapters to break down each one and how they were a group.
Yeah, I thought the episode was really well directed, because to pull off that type of visual, stylistic narrative storytelling is very difficult. There's very few people who can do it correctly. Obviously, Quentin Tarantino is the best at it, but that style added to the storyline. It made Sands, exactly like you were saying, seem like a superhero, like he was larger than life, and this comic book secret agent 007 type of character who broke the rules, who fell in love with a woman and had a child, and the child doesn't even know that he is his father. So even though he has no relationship with them, Sands is still out there, protecting him in any way that he can. Tanner looms large over the entire picture, takes his son away, but knows that that's the way to get to Sands. So we learned a lot about Sands tonight, and he has a much bigger heart than we think that he does, and I believe we broke new ground with him, and it could be a foreshadowing moment for later on in the season.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so curious now what he's going to do and how more about his relations with Morra directly. I mean, obviously, we learned a lot about how Eddie Morra got his edge and the conspiracy that's behind all this with the NZT and the shortage and why everybody's so, bloodthirsty over this drug. So many lives have been lost, and we've kind of talked about why that culture is the way it is, and we pretty much got the answer. I mean, it seems like once Eddie Morra started using it and figured out that he needed to separate himself as, the smartest person on one side and keep that advantage from anyone else, he started having Sands dispatch and kill all of the drug dealers, spreading it away, and then all the people using it, which included Rebecca's dad.
Yeah, Rebecca's dad. And it wasn't just Sands, it was Houston, too, who we met this episode and who ultimately helped Sands start a new life, got him out of jail.
Right, connected him to Morra.
And so they were sort of a tag team of killers, of assassins for Mr. Morra, taking control of the city's NZT supply. Like Brian was saying at the end of the episode, which was, I thought, really coolly displayed graphically, there was a lot of NZT on the streets, and now it's all gone. It's dried up, and just a very few select individuals have it. The FBI has it, Morra has it, but that's about it. The rest of the people were eliminated, and this is something that Brian has just discovered. He's discovered that he killed Rebecca's dad, and he knows a lot more information about Mr. Sands. So I come away from this episode thinking Brian is in a much better position of power should anything come up down the road that he does not want to do. And I think his biggest goal in all of this, outside of his family, which we haven't seen so far yet, a lot more of Finch's dad, his family. We did see his sister tonight, but I do want to make this point that I think his ultimate goal is to protect Rebecca from the Morra organization.
Right.
As the pressure continues to mount. Now, it seemed like the pressure went down this episode. There really wasn't a question about Rebecca, if she knew more about the organization, which seemed like it was simmering last week. It sort of went away for this episode.
Yeah, I never got the feeling where she was in danger, really. I mean, luckily, as a official FBI agent, I think there is sort of surveillance or some security that we may not see around them. I mean, they're obviously very well trained, but I can only imagine that for those agents that they protect them in at least a minimal capacity, whether that is, some type of keeping tabs on them, with surveillance, obviously not in an intrusive way, but, just you got to manage your assets. And for someone as trained as Rebecca, the FBI must have invested a lot into her. I mean, she's a very smart person, but she's also very well trained.
That's an interesting thought. I remember a few episodes ago when Casey was killed by Boyle shooting him, and they had that whole big dust up in the office where they're throwing smoke grenades, and it was an attack on the office. So I think the security there was actually really lax to allow them to get up to the floor. But it was a mutiny from the inside, so it was their own agents that were the source of the issue there. So.
Right. And yeah, I don't want to discount Rebecca here because I think that her character would just, head on a swivel constantly. Like, she's very equipped to take care of herself. The fact that she found out all of that information about Sans anyway from the get-go, after an initial meeting, shows that, she's not going to let that blatant of a security risk go unnoticed. She's definitely going to, I think, look around. I mean, maybe she hasn't found the security stuff that we saw implanted in her place yet, but I don't think that's far off.
You think she's going to figure out that she's bugged?
Figure it out.
That's interesting because I will disagree with you. I think that she does not know that that's coming, and that Brian and Rebecca's interactions there. We got a little sneak tonight of Sans watching them too, but they weren't talking about anything that would incriminate the Morra organization or anything that was out of bounds. It was a birthday conversation. It was a friendly thing. He had a pillow that he was giving her that she could sleep on at his desk.
Yeah, ostrich pillow.
Is that what those are called?
I've actually seen that before, and I'm glad. Like, the quirkiness of the show, I really like, because it definitely breaks up. I mean, we talk about Sans poisoning people in public, and then they really shift to the other side and kind of make it fun with things like the ostrich pillow and Sans just punching Brian in the face because they have to close the loop of throwing his phone out when Rebecca called.
Right.
I love those kind of funny moments that are not, they're for purpose. Like, they are like for a reason that makes sense, and it's not just we thought this was funny.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say what you want about the ostrich pillow, obviously, but that it's such an off the wall thing that fits for Brian. Like, it's something so random. Like, he probably saw it in the Sky Mall.
Yeah.
And it was like, yep, this is awesome. It's those kinds of things that are so unordinary that really make it fun. It's not like I don't think there's another show that has that nap pillow thing.
That's true. I also liked the Ike and Brian's sister storyline. That was fun. You could kind of feel there was a chemistry in the air when he walked in.
And they didn't just bring it out of nowhere. It wasn't like he just showed up and then she slept with him immediately. Like, he mentioned at least an episode back that he liked her and wanted to pursue. So that might actually be a relationship instead of just Ike's one night stand.
But he embellished on the bullet story.
Let's
not forget, he did not take a bullet for Brian. So I took a bullet. That's just, I'm tough, He's trying to impress her. I was like, oh, goodness. But she really liked it, bought it. All of a sudden, she was really interested when she wasn't at first. Was totally bored, and he can't come up with anything to say. So he's like, hey, we're going to be buddies, right? And she's like, it was so funny. It was so awkward, He was clearly into her and trying to make it happen, but they ultimately got together. I liked it. I like that Ike was over there, and then, when Brian shows back up again, he freaks out and he wants everything sanitized and get out of my life, and you have to call him Ike. I thought that was pretty funny. And it broke up. It broke up the serious sort of dramatic parts of the episode, which is nice. It's nice to take a little break.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a nice little moment, that we could have seen coming, but it was great that they didn't dwell on it. They didn't draw it out longer than it needed to be. They didn't make it if that was the procedural element in the episode, I would have been a little bit more upset.
Sure.
But it was just a fun little thing with bringing back Brian's family, which I love that story element. It definitely fits right back into Brian sort of as an older brother, playing kind of that role, and it gives him more character traits as well.
Yeah.
he was able to spin it in a way where he was mad, but not in like a putting foot down way.
Yeah.
It was just a Brian
It's
way.
just a brother grossed out about his sister hooking up with someone.
Yeah, in his room.
In his room, yeah, exactly. That's the worst part.
Yeah.
You need to clean my sheets. Oh, I would feel the same
Just
exact way.
maid
clean
service.
my sheets, yeah.
Antibacterial, everything.
Oh, that'd be so gross. But I do want to say, this was episode 16.
Yeah.
We're gonna have 22, so we're in the home stretch here now.
We are winding down.
We've got about 5 episodes left, and I think the tension now is really going to build for the rest of the season. I think this was probably our last respite from the heavy drama that's coming. We've got a lot to handle before the first season is over. Rebecca is awfully close to understanding how Morra rose, which is through the NZT. Sands is in position to catch her, researching it with her apartment being bugged. Brian now knows that Sands killed Rebecca's father. There's a lot of information that we've learned in the past couple of episodes that I think is truly going to increase the drama as we approach the end of the first season of this show. CBS has not renewed this show for a second season yet. I know I saw Doug Arniakowski out there, the co-executive producer. I follow him on Twitter. He was saying, come on, CBS, renew us for season 2.
Right.
So the crew still doesn't know if they're going to come back for next season. So I think all things being equal and being shot already, they will probably approach the end of the first season as if it's the end of the show. I can remember thinking about this. There was a show, I can't remember exactly. Mad Men. They would always end the season as if they were not coming back because they never knew what their status was with AMC as to whether or not they're going to come back for another season. So I think the same situation will apply here with this show, in that the season finale will feel like a series finale just in case they actually don't come back for next season.
Ooh. Hopefully we get something big and juicy. I mean,
yeah.
Rebecca, I almost forgot about this. Rebecca mentioned that she wished for her dad to, the reason why birthdays are kind of a sour subject for her is that she wished for her dad to die. Luckily she found out that when she did that, he was already passed. And so her wish, at least she knows that her wish didn't contribute in any way. Obviously, she had struggled with that for some time, and I think that contributed to why birthdays were just a no-mention topic.
That moment for you, that moment for me, I couldn't tell if she was happy that her dad was dead and not at her party, or upset about it enough that it carries over year by year. I didn't quite understand what the emotional impact was.
Well, yeah, it was complicated for sure. But to me, Rebecca was more relieved that she finally realized and was able to stop blaming herself for something that she had no control over. I think that, when you are angry at someone, they didn't show up, you kind of say things in the moment, overcome with emotion, like she did. If someone you really care about made a promise to make it to your birthday and didn't show and broke that promise, you would be upset.
Yeah.
You could do something rash like that. That's a birthday wish. It is not really that extreme, but when it seems like it may have come true, like that would be devastating.
Yeah.
Especially when it's so big, like your parents' life. I think that she was blaming herself for a number of years, and only when she finally was able to take a step back and realize, oh, I found him this amount of time, that means he had passed before I made that. Now I know, now I can be at peace with the fact that they're different and I didn't do anything, even in karma to bring upon this.
That's a good point. I think that makes a lot of sense. And she knows that he was trying to get cleaned up.
Right.
So I think now that Brian has this information, it may be even more of a relief to her to know that he wasn't high or overdosed or got into it with the wrong. Well, he did get into it with the wrong people, but may have not been as responsible for his death as she may have.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like a foolish overdose.
Or a suicide.
Yeah, or a suicide, but more of like a planned hit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wonder if now that Brian knows the truth, that Sands most likely killed her father, and Rebecca is sort of, scratching on that realization as well. Like, I feel like it's only a number of episodes before that really comes to light.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. On a separate point that I wanted to make is I think the show handles violence creatively. They don't show you Sands shooting a guy in the head. You see the outside of the apartment building. A few episodes ago, they switched the words. They started calling murderers huggers instead. I thought that was too cute for me. It didn't ring true, and it felt like they were totally sanitizing what the real actions were. But I thought the use of the comic book images in this episode was a creative way to accomplish the violence of it, especially at the end when Sands is out there killing all these NZT users. We see him in a graphic image, in a comic book image, specifically seen standing behind Rebecca's dad with rope in his hands. And it seems far less real and scary and R-rated if it's in the comic book, to whereas if it's live action and you actually see him doing it. So I applaud the producers and the creative team for finding ways to express that violence was happening without explicitly showing it.
No, that's a really good point, and that reminds me of something else I had seen in the comic book scene with the background of Sands and sort of how he was with this group, because they were able to do it that way. There was one comic book where they were like at a strip club, and it kind of gave a sense of who they were as people, kind of that kind of a rough group, and how Sands is, killing people. They're very not PG, and it just had the censored thing. Obviously, this is a network show played at prime time, in some places if you get the East Coast feed, where they can accomplish that. It doesn't have to be on HBO or Showtime to see that type of, or to get that storyline across and to get who these people are across. You can do it in a creative way that's not explicit, and it still makes sense, and it doesn't take away from the show, but you don't have to shy away from that because it's on basic cable.
Yeah, and I think it's what you just said is true. It's so interesting when you can focus on one character. We had 60 minutes, we had an hour-long show just based upon one character's backstory and in exploring who they were. And I think that's what's so interesting about this show. It's not the cases and the models and the stick figures are all cute and funny. But when you dig deep into who the characters are, that's when I think it's most interesting. I still think about the episode where we learned about Boyle's military history and working with his friend who had the bionic arm. I thought that was so interesting and cool. And when we get to see Brian's background with his family and the concern that his dad has for him, that is what's so powerful about the show. And it shows that they have the characters, they have the story, they have the plot that works, that creates an interesting show, and you can spend an entire hour on one guy. So I'm hoping the direction of the show continues in what we've seen so far, or what we saw tonight, in that explore the characters that you've got. They're all interesting on their own, and you don't have to have 4 things going on at the same time to make it interesting or exciting.
No, exactly, and I think that the way that they've set this up with the turmoil between characters is really interesting too. It reminds me a lot of Game of Thrones, where they do have so many characters, and that's how it is so interesting. I mean, you realize what the deception and sort of what the characters know, and when all of the stories, those backstories build up in a way where it starts affecting each other, that's when it really gets interesting. And I can't wait for that to happen, because I feel like they're really setting it up, obviously with Sands and Rebecca most in the forefront.
Yeah, most immediately. That's the conflict that we have ahead that's going to drive the rest of the season. How close can Rebecca get to figuring out that Morra's on NZT? Maybe she finds it out and then doesn't tell anybody and continues to investigate his sources. The question will be when she finds out for sure that Morra is
behind everything.
Well, Morra's on NZT. Will she go further and then find out that he's behind all of the rest? The murders of the people who were using it. That may have to carry into a hypothetical season 2 if it does come. But I think she's going to learn it very quickly. She didn't learn it this week. I think you predicted that last week, but she didn't learn it this week. But I think it's coming sooner rather than later. And the real question directionally for the show is, does she immediately confront him with the information, or does she play the long game in trying to figure out the entire system that's happening underneath all of this?
Ooh, I have no idea. I mean, that's a super good predict. I mean, shall we just go into predictions?
Sure, let's do it. We gotta go.
And now, your AFTERBUZZ TV predictions.
Right, because don't you think? I mean, there are certain conflicts now that are coming to a head.
Right.
With this show, and there are questions that we are going to absolutely have answered within the next 5 or 6 episodes before they break and go on hiatus. And I think that's one of the big ones. Rebecca's going to find out that Morra has been using NZT, but what action does she take? Does she go in the direction where she's going to take him down for everything, or just, hey, I found this out, I'm going to go tell everyone now? That's like, and then we have the family aspect of it. I think that scene between Nas and Finch's dad was a huge one and a big foreshadowing moment. And he said, if you ever put my son in physical danger, I will have you. And Brian hasn't been put in that type of danger yet, where his dad would need to take action. And I think that's coming. I really think the tension is heightened. So if I'm predicting anything, it's that starting next week, we are going to really, truly get a build toward the maximum crescendo at the end of the season, the climax of the end of the season. Because the pieces, like you were talking about before, the pieces are now in place where you're going to start seeing big chess moves coming. From Morra after Rebecca, from Rebecca after Morra, from Brian, torn between two sides and having to make a choice. And then I think Brian's dad will come back into the season to, try and get his son out of there.
Right. I cannot. I mean, that's oh man, all of that would be so interesting. I hope all of that comes true.
Right.
I feel very strongly that Rebecca is going after something. I mean, I know that we only have a few episodes remaining, so that doesn't give us a lot of time.
Yep.
But she's so smart, and she always figures it out. I mean, this episode is a great example of that, because she is basically one small step behind Brian.
Yes.
She's able to use all of her legitimate resources, not be on drugs, and figure it out in almost the same time. So it's just a matter of episodes before she either finds Sands or Morra. And I can't decide which one's coming first. I think that one of them is coming as the big finale.
Okay.
And if it's Sands, I think Sands is gonna be killed.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, Eddie Morra, I think, would be It'd be huge. It'd be huge. But I wouldn't like. I don't know if they would jeopardize that if they do come back, because that's such a huge storyline that can go for many, many seasons.
Yes.
I don't know if they would want to cap him off too soon.
Exactly. The Morra story and him as a figure holds the show together.
Right.
You probably wouldn't want to bring him down if you're planning on doing 5, 6, or 7 seasons of the show. You'd probably want to keep him in place.
Right, but maybe they plant a seed. Like if she does get Sands, she finds some clue that leads to Morra, or like a Morra vote for Morra pin or something.
Well, she already knows that Sands works for Morra, so she does have
but
that
I mean like a
information.
pin like in some area that's like very that implicates him to a crime.
I see. Okay.
Because I think that she knows that he's connected, but there's no real evidence to NZT specifically.
Yeah.
Maybe something in the lab. The one thing that we don't really know anything about still is the antidote.
Yeah.
So I'm still curious about that. Obviously they kind of shut down the production of NZT, but how did the antidote come to be? Like maybe the people that were using it, like maybe there are naturally born people who are immune to the effects, and they killed them all or something, and like took their DNA and somehow reverse engineered something. But it's interesting that so many people were using NZT, and if it was so hurtful, if it just destroyed your body, then I don't think they'd be able to use it as much.
Yeah, and there was one case in the movie that went unsolved. You had Eddie Morra, when he was on one of his NZT benders, a woman that he was seen going in a hotel room with ended up dead, and his attorney got him out of it. But that was just because he was one in a lineup, and so the person who said that she saw someone like him couldn't identify him. But that case never was solved in the movie, and it was something that was left open-ended. So I think that could be something that could come back.
Ooh.
If we are to follow your theory and to say, something could implicate Morra and bring him down in a crime. Clearly he's too smart now to let himself get caught.
Right.
But before he was completely on this pill and thinking all these things through, before he had control of it, he was still blacking out in stages and, not remembering hours at a time. So I'll make a prediction. I'll just put it on the books just in case it comes true, and I can come back and pat myself on the back that they'll revisit that murder case with Morra.
Nice.
Because it never got solved, and we never heard from that from the movie.
That would be a crazy turn of events. I would love to see that again. It's circle closed.
Yeah.
Especially tying it from the movie to the TV show would be really cool.
Really cool.
I mean, they do a lot of with TV now and the catch-up-ons. Like you can pretty much pull from anything.
Yeah.
Seasons now go back full seasons.
Yeah.
So it's not I don't think it's impossible for the Limitless show to take upon the movie and sort of dial that in. That'd be really cool.
That'd be great.
I would hope to see that.
We'll have to see.
We will have to wait and see. Till next episode, I think it is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Where can the people find you, Frank?
Thanks for listening, everybody. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Go Frank M. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you guys can find me, JB, at Hey John Blake. See you next time.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.